This is a demonstration for making a macarons using the Swiss meringue technique, which is going to involve getting our egg whites in a double boiler on the stove with our sugar on low heat to help the sugar dissolve. So as opposed to the French meringue technique where we add the sugar in at the beginning and mix this on low so that the sugar can gradually get dissolved and absorbed, we're going to speed up that process by using heat on the stove. Aside from that, the techniques of what are used for making French style macarons are the same. There just may be a little bit of difference in some of the ingredients and the way we're processing them. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. On our scale, we're gonna go ahead and weigh out our key ingredients, and that is the almond flour, which is going to be 52 grams. So that's being done into a boat that we set the tare to 0. It's okay if we're off by a gram or two, so 53. That may be a glare with the lights. Okay, and then for our powdered sugar, it is the same amount, shooting for 52. So that's a 1-to-1 ratio. $55 might be a little bit heavy. 53, 52. All right, and for this particular recipe, we're not going to be grinding these together for the concern about the oils in the almond flour being released. We're actually just going to sift them together a few more times than we would do otherwise. Okay, so if we put the almond flour and the powdered sugar together through our coarse sieve, it's going to mix and maybe catch some of the larger chunks. It looks like most of the almond flour is going to come out in this first go, and then we're going to go ahead and do that a second time into a similar size medium bowl. And then our third sift is going to be through our drum sieve, the Tammy, that has smaller holes. Okay, so that is this. Okay, a much finer mesh. And for that, with our flexible spatula, we often have to use the flat edge. Okay, and anything that doesn't go through, after we try to force it through, we're going to discard. So this hopefully is getting all of these two dry ingredients totally mixed together and eliminating the larger chunks that can lead to kind of splotchy, rough macarons. All right, so we're getting down to the almond flour at the end. I'm going to push on this sideways to try to help force it through. And seeing that that does not want to go through anymore, I'm going to pile it up in the edge. I say that's about a tablespoon, and that's what we're expecting. So these larger chunks are going to get tossed in the trash. That is our dry sifted almond flour and powdered sugar. Now for our eggs, turning this on, we had 52 and 52. Okay, adding to 104, our eggs are going to be 50 grams. So if we tear this out and make sure we're on grams, we're using pasteurized egg whites. Make sure that we mix those up a little bit. And some of the eggs may stick to the inside of this measuring cup, so it's okay if we go over by just a few grams. So 48, 53 is fine. Okay, 3 grams is gonna be about half a teaspoon, so when we pour this out we should get 50 grams. And then our regular sugar, granular sugar, is going to also be 50 grams. So again, this is close to a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio. For a regular sugar, we want to make sure that we have a new container that has not been used before, possibly measuring out almond flour, because we definitely don't want any of the fat of almond flour ending up in our egg whites, okay, because the fat gets in the way of making a meringue. So this is going to be 50 grams. $51 is fine, could be over 1 or 2 grams. 53, I'll be fine with 51. All right, and so the additional ingredient that we're using that is unique to this particular recipe is the addition of our egg white protein, which is just dehydrated egg whites. We're gonna be adding that to our liquid egg whites in the fact that they are going to help stabilize and make for a stronger meringue. And the amount that we're gonna be using, as I put this tare on 0, is 4 grams. Okay, so that ends up being pretty close to about a tablespoon. And we're using the scale, okay, so that's 4. And when we look back at everything that we've measured out, it ends up being pretty interesting ratios. That's 50 grams of eggs and 4 grams of the powder, 54, and 50 grams of sugar for a total of 104. And then our powdered sugar and almond flour, 52 and 52 is 104. So it's pretty much 1 to 1 to 1 to 1 ratios, just divided differently between the regular sugar for the meringue and the powdered sugar for the almond flour. All right, what's unique about this egg white powder is that it can clump up pretty easily, okay, and because there's only 4 grams, I want to make sure we get every last little bit out. We want to mix this together, okay, with a fork, just trying to whisk it in a sense. Don't need to go get a big whisk dirty, but make sure this is all together mixed so that it doesn't clump up, because this sugar and egg white powder is going to be going with the raw eggs into a double boiler, heated up on the stove. And so we want to make sure this is going to dissolve pretty easily as we heat that up before we get on to making our meringue. So once I break up all these clumps, then we'll be going to the stove top and getting the rest of our stuff set up. All right, so before we go to the stove and do our work at the double boiler for making our meringue, we want to go ahead and make sure all our things are set up so that we're ready to pipe once that is done. So from earlier video in this process, remember we want a 2/3 sheet pan. We'll be using our Silpat as a template for piping. I want a piece of parchment paper that is the size of this sheet pan. Okay, and cut to size with clean edge so that it is not hanging over and touching the side of the oven, possibly catching fire. It's okay for it to be a little bit smaller than the sheet pan, but definitely should overlap the Silpat underneath. Okay, we want our tip, round tip, for doing our piping, our bag that accommodates that. This is our 16-inch piping bag. I want this to be snipped in such a way that the tip can fit inside but not pop out the other end. So hopefully didn't cut that too small. That looks just right. So it allows the batter just to come out of this, but if you had cut this where the plastic was still overhanging, then you won't get that size effect you want. And this is going to go into our measuring cup, with this laid down sideways so it doesn't ooze out once I fill this. All right, I have my bowl for the meringue to go into when it's done, my spatula for folding in first the color, and then my dry ingredients. All right, so we're gonna move the camera over and set up at the stovetop to show you the double boiler method for the Swiss meringue technique. All right, so when we're talking about a double boiler, basically getting some water together simmering and putting a bowl over it that allows the heat coming off the water to heat the bottom of the bowl. All right, and so we definitely don't want a bowl that sits inside and touches the water. So for this particular pot, this would be a bad choice. And it needs to be a bowl, some are heavier duty stainless steel that doesn't conduct heat so readily, so some are thinner bowls would not be great. This is our perfect bowl. It actually can sit here on top, and if I look at the bottom, it doesn't get wet. It's not touching. Another option you might think would be this larger bowl. Okay, but that is on top so much that barely only the bottom is getting touched by the steam, so that's just a little bit too big. Alright, so this is it. Now, if we say double boiler, but actually it's a little bit misleading because I really don't want this water boiling so much as simmering. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that up to heat and pause the camera during that time. And I do not want this bowl hanging out over that water as I'm heating up the water, because I don't want the bowl to get extra hot as the water is heating up. So while that's heating up, let's talk about what we're going to be doing in this heating process. And that heating process is going to involve us heating up our egg whites along with our sugar and egg white powder so that that sugar gets dissolved. Okay, so while that's heating up with a whisk, and I like this handle fits my hand nicely, balloon whip, thin wires. Go ahead and whisk that so this has a chance to get dissolved before it goes on the heat. And we're just doing this in such a way for us to dissolve the sugars, but definitely not cook the egg whites. So we're only looking at a 115 to 120 Fahrenheit heat. All right, now that this water is starting to come to a simmer, I'm gonna back off a little bit so it doesn't continue to come up to a boil, and put my double boiler bowl inside. We'll grab the whisk and have handy our thermometer to be checking the temp. We're going for like 115 to 120, definitely in the 130 stage. We run the risk of starting to cook this egg in a way that we don't want to. All right, so the thermometer kind of helps make sure that we don't go too hot. But we also, so right now I'm 117, 120, I think I'm about done. We also, honestly, just with our finger can make sure that we don't feel any gritty sugar. So that's it, that was really quick, okay? And we're gonna be taking this back to the KitchenAid and getting a rubber spatula to make sure we scrape out all the egg, because we need to whip that up. So I'll take that off the heat.